I think as teachers, we can so commonly overcomplicate things with all of the hats that we need to wear and all of the things that we need to do. So, talking about simplicity, Julia, can you talk to us about some go to strategies that can support a range of learners in the classroom without overhauling an entire lesson plan?
Yes, and I'm so glad that you said the word simplicity because that was kind of one of my main notes is that differentiation can look so different. It can be as complicated or as simple as you want it to be, but so often we do overcomplicate it because we think that we have to.
Welcome to Rainbow Skies for Teachers, the go to show dedicated to teachers who want to make a big difference in education. Whether you're in your first few years or well into your teaching career, we are here to inspire, support, and empower you with bite sized tips, simple strategies, and the motivation to lead an education revolution, one classroom at a time.
We're Ashley and Alicia from Rainbow Sky Creations, two Aussie teachers who love all things teaching and learning. We are here to help you thrive as you work toward making an impact in your students' lives while loving your life as a teacher.
We are here to help you bring joy, simplicity, and creativity into your classroom on the daily because
there are rainbows ahead, my friend, and together we're unstoppable.
Let's get into today's episode.
Rainbow Sky Creations acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Dharawal and Whadjuk Noongar people. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.
Hello, hello. Ashley here from Rainbow Sky Creations. You are listening to Rainbow Skies for Teachers. Today's chat is all about differentiation. And if you've ever wanted to make differentiation a little simpler in your classroom, then you're going to love this episode. My guest, Julia, is one I've wanted to have on the podcast for quite a while. You may know her as Miss Chalmers Cherubs. She's very big on Instagram and she has so much goodness to share. We delve into some strategies for effective differentiation, but keeping it simple and allowing student ownership and also the roles that routines have to play in differentiation and in your classroom. Today's chat goes in lots of different directions, but it all comes back down to one thing, and that is differentiation. I think you're going to love it. Introducing Julia Chalmers. Welcome, Julia. So you had mentioned on socials that you used to feel like you were drowning in differentiation. Side note, hard relate. What did that look like for you back then? And tell me, what was the turning point?
So back when I was a grad teacher, I think we're like trying to do all of the things, like we want the best for our students. I think we always have really high expectations for ourselves as teachers because we know how important our job is. And so I knew that I wanted to be differentiating, but it is so time consuming. So I thought that like looking for a new activity for every single lesson, for every single level, I knew that like wasn't sustainable. So actually creating these new activities for every single level, for every single lesson was just like absolutely going to eat me alive. And I already felt like I was drowning in everything else that I had to do as well. So that is actually how I had started running like with my math warm-ups because I found that they were really easy to edit and create in advance. So that was kind of like my entryway into differentiation. So just reaching the point where I was like crying over the kitchen table, thinking, how am I going to complete all of this planning, all of this differentiation, and thinking, right, I'm going to start here. This is one simple thing that I can do to start differentiating and start feeling like I am meeting the needs of different learners in my class.
Yes, Julia, I think so many teachers can relate to the fact that they're sitting there or crying at the kitchen table thinking, how am I going to do this? Teachers are generally high achievers. They want to do the best for their students. And I think I've said that like a million times on the podcast, but it's true. And I love that you just said, look, I started with one little thing and I built up from there. And we're going to talk about how you built up from there and different strategies that you can use. I've never thought of starting with a warm up before, but I really love that idea.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I felt like it was the quickest point of entry for me because warm-ups like naturally are kind of, fast paced and there's not too much pressure on you. There's not too much pressure on the kids. So being able to integrate things into the warm-ups that you could differentiate, even if it's like a sneaky side note to a kid like, hey, I actually want you to use 3 digits with this warm-up rather than 2. It just was like the way that I thought I can do this without actually adding anything onto my workload. in terms of like printing extra things or organizing extra things. So that's where I started back in the day.
Yeah, this is why I love the podcast because that idea to you seems very obvious. And when I was like, I love that idea, you went, oh, thanks, like, duh. But that's something that I've never really thought of. And I'm sure that there's teachers listening to this going, oh, wow, what a really fabulous idea. Or other teachers might be feeling validated, going, yeah, I start with differentiation in my warm ups too. So that's why I love chatting to teachers and sharing ideas like this because I think there's always something that we can learn and share with each other.
Oh, absolutely. And that's like where that part of like being consciously unskilled kind of comes in, which is something that I've been like reading about recently. It's like when you do something and you think that everybody else is doing it, so you don't bother sharing it. And then when you start connecting with other teachers and you're like, actually, I do this. And they're like, oh my gosh. And with the podcast, it's such a great way to kind of get that information out there and people can draw on what works for them and what they want to try, and continue to add tools to their toolkit.
Yeah, absolutely. So you describe differentiation as an art. What does that mean to you?
Okay, so differentiation, I feel like comes in two parts. It's like a mindset shift and also having a bank of reliable strategies to draw on. So the mindset shift is about being okay with the fact that differentiation is sometimes something really simple and these small tweaks that we can make, and you're not having to reinvent the wheel. So it's almost like not feeling guilty for not having a different activity for every single, student in that lesson or every single like group within that lesson. The second part of that about having a bank of reliable strategies is collecting these things by trying them out like the warm-ups. So then you're becoming consciously or unconsciously skilled in that area where you're just doing it as second nature. So knowing that like you're kind of meeting these different levels by things that you're already doing and you're already confident with doing. So that's where the art form kind of comes in, is giving yourself the permission and grace to keep it simple if you need to. And also knowing that you have a bank of strategies that you can pull out of your toolkit and be like, right, this is going to work for this student. This is going to work for this lesson. This is going to work for this subject. And that comes with time as well. So if you're sitting there thinking like, oh my gosh, there's nothing in my toolkit right now, it's about just trying like one thing at a time and continuing to build on that.
Absolutely. That toolkit does really get built over time. We have done other episodes about differentiation. If you want to learn some different strategies, go and check out episode 76. We talk about different strategies there, and that's actually part 2 of a 2-parter. So I'll link both of those episodes in the show notes if you want to learn more. But I also want to just go and touch on something that you just said, which Alicia and I often say ourselves, and it's that teachers are often doing these things without even realizing it. It's like second nature. And I think when we go back to you crying on the kitchen table thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to cater for all of these kids? Sometimes you're doing a much better job than what you think you are. And sometimes just listening to, say, that episode 76 or listening to what we're going to talk about today will really make teachers think, yeah, I am doing this. And maybe I just need to try this. And often differentiation is about testing and trialing. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. And it's like not one size fits all either. So being able to like test and try with different kids and you get feedback from them, and what works for one set of kids, might not work with another set of kids. And I think it's just so important to, be kind and be gentle with yourself as well. Because when you do listen to episodes or you talk to someone or you talk to another teacher, you will reflect and think, oh, I'm actually already doing this. So sometimes
Yeah.
you think you're actually not differentiating, and all along you actually were, because you weren't seeing all the incredible things that, maybe a non-teacher would notice when they step into your classroom. They're like, oh my gosh, how do they do all of these things? They know that student needs 2-digit numbers. They know that student needs 3-digit numbers. They know that student needs their medication at lunchtime. Like all of these things that we're juggling that we do naturally. So sometimes like hearing the strategies listed, you're like, oh, okay, I actually already do this.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to be lifting each other up as teachers because it's so easy to look at the deficits or look at the things that you don't think you do very well and the ways you need to improve. But there's so many things that teachers are doing that are so amazing out there in classrooms.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And like that reminds me of something I read recently, which is like living in the gain and not the gap. So
Oh,
when things happen, even in normal life, rather than like looking at the gap of what was missing or what's not being done, you're actually sitting in the gain and either looking at, okay, that was a lesson, I learned something from it, Or, okay, I may not have done that, but look at everything else that I've done. And I think that mindset shift is sometimes everything as well, because it's so easy to think like, oh my gosh, I want to do this and I'm not doing it. I should have just tried harder, or I should have been more organized, when really we can shine a light on all the incredible things we are doing. And they are going to be the things that kids remember about us as well.
Oh my gosh, yes. So much yes to that. Julia, can you tell us? So we're touching upon this in our discussion now, but
Mm.
let's talk about some common misconceptions teachers have about differentiation and what you wish teachers knew more about differentiation.
Okay. We've already kind of touched on about how my own misconception was that I needed a separate activity for every single, level. Even if I was doing, 3 leveled groups in my math lesson, I needed a separate activity for each of those levels. And while, yes, that can absolutely work, it's not the only way to do it. There can be just simple tweaks and shifts that you can make. So you are differentiating without like the added workload. So that's probably, the main misconception I see coming up. Sometimes it can be as simple as like adding something in or taking something away. So I was working on a subtraction lesson the other day where we were like subtracting by tens. So some of my students completed that activity with a hundreds grid. That was the support element. Other students just completed that activity by subtracting 10 mentally. So I actually had the same activity sheet and it was just supported by a hundreds grid, or just I had taken that hundreds grid away and allowed students to, complete that mentally or by increasing the amount of digits in a number. So I think that's where like those little things can come in to actually allow you to differentiate without the added workload. The second thing that did come up for me when I was thinking about this was, if you are running differentiated groups in your lessons, and this is something that I have done as well, so I kind of mix it up, we often find ourselves trying to keep every single group on task.
Mhm.
And my perspective might be a little, controversial, but I don't mind if my group in the back corner is drawing on their whiteboards instead of completing their nap thumbs, because the group that I'm with is my most important group. The misconception that comes up here is that when you are running differentiated math groups, you have to be everywhere at once. Everybody should be on task, but that's just not reality in a classroom. So for me, I think if you are focusing on running a differentiated group and you're having students at your table for some targeted practice, like you have to use that time wisely and strategically. And if that means that there's a couple of kids maybe, not doing what they supposed to be doing in the back corner, as long as they're not cutting anyone's hair or anything like that, then it's okay to just let it slide and really focus on supporting the students that are with you.
I actually don't think that's too controversial. I have the same sort of theory in my classrooms when I'm running maths groups, reading groups, any sort of groups, that group that's sitting with me is the most important one, because you can really easily get pulled away from that group that's sitting in front of you. They don't get their explicit teaching from you. And
Mm.
the kids in the back corner who are building towers out of the MABs are getting all of the time from you. And it's just all about management. So no one's really learning anything.
Exactly. And you're just like being pulled in 100 different areas. And that is funny. My teacher brain then was like, and if they are building towers with MABs, I want you to calculate the value of
Exactly.
that tower. So it's like, and that might be something that you just quickly throw out to them and then you get back to your group. So I'm glad it's not too controversial. I think it was just more of something like, again, I had to give myself permission with as a beginning teacher back in the day. That's always when admin walk in, when you're
Yes.
running these differentiated groups and, they're building towers and you're working with your group, and you feel like everyone should be on task. But often there's actually a lot of learning going on underneath the surface anyway.
Yeah, and I think in those times too, that's when some of those activities that are repeatable skills where you want to build up that fluency, or just some of those things that they're practicing, really come into play. I used to always think one of the things that I thought when I first began was that they need to be learning something in those groups about what we were learning at the time. instead of just
Mm,
like, oh, it could just be a refresher. And that's why we love like the games that we've created,
yes.
like hands-on activities that kids get involved in that they actually buy into. So they want to do it, but also they're just practicing some of those other skills. And it might not be about volume and capacity that you're teaching, or it might not be about multiplication that you're teaching. And that is also okay because they're busy and involved in a learning activity, not necessarily about the topic.
Yeah, exactly. And they're like consolidating previous skills.
Yes.
And for me, like that's a tick anyway, because you can't just teach something once and then expect that they've got it and then move on. Like it is about just refreshing. And that's the way you can integrate that into your lessons as well. And even then, that might be a form of differentiation because you might have a game that focuses on really simple skills. And because it is a game, your extension kids are just quite happy to come along for the ride. But your students that really need that support are happy to play the game because they need to focus on those skills. So
Absolutely.
you can kind of weave it in wherever.
Yeah, you can. Or you could have those extension kids playing a different game, still a game, but a game that's suited towards skills that they need to work on and consolidate. And then those kids that need that more support, they might be playing a different sort of game, but they're all playing a game, but it's just
Mm.
catered towards their needs.
Yeah, and that's where I love like things that do, games like with the cards that make it really easy to differentiate, like making different digits. And when the game looks very similar too,
Yes.
those students don't have that moment of reflection where they're like, oh my gosh, am I on the easy one? Like, and I try and build all of my differentiated activities around that. Like all of my math units, all of the activities look very similar. And there's these little tweaks there that do extend or support. So those students don't have that moment of like, oh my gosh, am I not smart enough? Because they become very self-aware, but it also means that you're kind of delivering the same content as well and explaining the same rules to the game.
Yes. Making it easy for the teacher, but also it's great for the kids.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's just teaching in a nutshell, my
Yeah.
goal for teaching in a nutshell. It's great for the kids and it's easier for the teacher. We want to work smarter and not harder and still get incredible results and relationships with our students too.
Yes, it's so easy to complicate things. I think as teachers, with all of the things you need to do and all of the hats you need to wear, it's very easy to make things complicated really quick. And I love that you said it's about working smarter and not harder. That's one of our mottos here at Rainbow Sky because it really is about simplifying things. I think as teachers, we can so commonly overcomplicate things with all of the hats that we need to wear and all of the things that we need to do. So, talking about simplicity, Julia, can you talk to us about some go to strategies that can support a range of learners in the classroom without overhauling an entire lesson plan?
Yes, and I'm so glad that you said the word simplicity because that was kind of one of my main notes is that differentiation can look so different. It can be as complicated or as simple as you want it to be, but so often we do overcomplicate it because we think that we have to. So some of the things that I love to use, which can be as simple as highlighting sections of an activity sheet. I'm all about the hands-on learning, but if I do need something paper-based, I'll just get like a fun highlighter, even better it's centered, and just, highlight every second question or fold the sheet in half. So, you're kind of minimizing that like visual overwhelm as well for some
Mm.
learners. They look at an activity and they're like, whoa, and you're like, hey, this is actually, you can just focus on these two. Again, I think it's important though to have a little side note there that like I will never cap a student's potential by doing that. You know your kids just like I would know my kids. So when you are, simplifying an activity, you always want to give your students the option to be like, hey, do you want to have a go with this? Or like, let's do this part first and then do this. But some students do really benefit from just having a reduced portion of the activity, whether that is like in a visual aspect, like folding a sheet in half or cutting off the bottom or highlighting every second question. But I know that's popped up in my community a couple of times as teachers saying, isn't that just limiting them from aiming for higher potential? Which actually comes into one of my next strategies, which is having something called like a bump it up wall, or I like to use the terms almost and some. So all of my students are going to be working on this. We are all going to be, starting a sentence with a capital letter and ending it with a full stop or a form of punctuation. So that's all of my kids. That's what I expect from everyone in this class. Most of my students are going to add in a adjective. Some of my students, I'm expecting they're going to add in an adverb. So this is where I may display and talk through those outcomes with my kids and saying, hey, everyone, this is what we're all going to work on. And if you want to challenge yourself, you're going to do this one now. And if you really want to challenge yourself, I'd love you to have a go at this. So it's giving them the option to still move through those points of differentiation, but you're also highlighting it to yourself what those points of almost and some look like, because you need to be really clear on what you're teaching so then you can differentiate, because that's going to get those cylinders firing in your brain and be like, right, if I am thinking about, grammar or sentence structure, what would an extension part of this look
Mm.
like? What would a support component look like? And that's where I find kind of working on the middle element first. So what you want most of your kids to achieve, and then being able to cater up and cater down if you need to as well sometimes helps.
And it's also inviting the kids to take a little bit more control over their own learning by using that framework. So you've got the success criteria there, and then they're able to say, okay, I'm going to start here and I am going to challenge myself today by doing B or B and C. I really like that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I found it really useful because it helps your students have that growth mindset of being like, I feel like this is completely achievable. And if I've already achieved this, I'm going to go for the next step as well. So
Mm.
it does put that ownership of the learning back onto the students. And it's even better if you get your kids involved in creating those points. So when they're familiar with the structure of almost and some, they can start to suggest things like, okay, what do you think we should all be aiming for today? And it does, you do have to be a little bit careful with the language, because you don't want to be like, well, most of you will be doing this, because some kids will fill in the gap and be like, oh, I can't do that. So
Yeah.
you do want to always approach it with like a positive aspect. All of us, we're going to aim for this one. What could be the next level? So you can even tweak the language, or like I like to use scoops, for an ice cream framework. It's like, right, we've got our 1 scoop. Let's do our 2 scoops. Let's do our 3 scoops. What was 3 scoops look like for this activity? So it's making that structure accessible for them in the terms that they can visualize those steps of their learning, but also for you as well. So you know where you're going with the actual lesson.
Yeah. Okay, you mentioned bump it up walls. Can you explain what a bump it up wall is? Bump it up walls came in kind of as I was having my babies and leaving the classroom. So I would love an explanation for me. And I'm sure there's teachers out there that have heard it and aren't sure as well.
Sure. Bumped up walls I have predominantly used with writing, just because the idea is that you will start with a fairly basic piece of writing or piece of work. And then for students to bump it up, it would have an additional set of criteria added. So they get to the next level. So these are usually paired with actual visual pieces where they can see work samples. So if you, and this is just my early childhood background showing, we were writing a weekend recounts, which we've all done to death. If it was a weekend recount, the first bump would be like on the weekend I, and then the next one would be that with added information. And the third level would be those. So it's almost like setting out a display where students can visualize and articulate exactly what improves each piece of work from the next step to the next step to the next step. So they are most useful though when you create them with your kids. So you might give them a level 2 piece of writing and you'll unpack it together and say, what actually makes this better than the last one? And it's important to use pieces of writing that are not your students, because you don't want them to be like, Johnny's writing was this and Ava's writing was this. So I always like to form those pieces of writing myself, because then I'm going to weave in the concepts that I want them to pick out as well. And then they would then draw it out and be like, oh, you actually used some interesting punctuation there. Okay, you've used a few adverbs there. You've made sure you've started that sentence with a capital letter. So it's drawing their attention to what actually would bump up their piece of work. And then they will hopefully apply that to their own work as well.
Would you write a piece of writing together as a class, write something like modeled writing, nice and simple, and then work on bumping it up together as a class and then bumping it up again? Or is it really about just offering a piece of writing that's already there?
Yes, so I would do that, but my personal feeling with that is I would have already done the model, the piece of writing that I've written, and then maybe the next lesson is, right, we're going to do shared writing or modeled writing. We're going to use our criteria that bumps it up, and now we're going to improve this piece of writing, and then we're going to do it again. So I would definitely do that. I would just integrate it into a learning sequence where you reduce that scaffolding. So again, that's like a I do, we do,
You
do.
do.
So like I'm doing the writing as a bump it up wall first, then we're going to do it together. And now I want you to take everything we've learned about how to get a piece of writing to the next level, and you're going to apply it to your own writing.
Okay, and I've got one other question for you.
Mm.
Say you're working on persuasive writing. Let's say we're in a grade 3 class or a little bit older, and you
Yeah.
might be working on persuasive writing for 5, 6 weeks. Would you have a bump it up wall for persuasive writing? And then when you switch over to narrative, you take that down and put up narrative? Is that how it would kind of work?
Yes. So if you were using a bump it up wall for writing structures and text structures, then you would do that. You would have it so it showcases the text structure that you're focusing on. So if I was doing narrative, it would be about narrative. If I was doing, persuasive, it would be about persuasive. And that's where using repeatable kind of frameworks are great for differentiation, because once your kids know what a bump it up wall is and how you form one and how you work on it together, then you can kind of cut and paste that to a different text structure. And that's very much like how a lot of my differentiation tools come in. Unlike if I just take what we're doing here and I make it work for a different subject. And when your kids have a familiar sort of layout and know what to expect in those particular activities, then it makes your life easier as well, because you're not having to like reteach. They've got background knowledge they can tap into.
Yeah. And also, you're using that classroom wall space as like a working document, something that they can refer back to and use instead of it
Yes.
just looking really pretty.
Yeah. I'm the biggest fan of a good display. Like my classroom was very much Pinterest worthy at one point. But I think the things that we have on our walls are always used more when the students get to collaborate on
Mm.
them. And I think having that working wall, you could have kids been like, oh, I've actually got something to add to the bump it up wall. I've just found this really cool piece of punctuation, or like, in a book, or a cool word, and I want to add it on. Or I love the way that this sentence was formed. Like, why did it sound so good? And you can unpack it together, and it's kind of like a working document, a working space.
Yes. I love that. In Dubai, Alicia and I used to teach and live in Dubai. And one of the programs they did there was Big Write. And it's an English program. You're nodding your head, so I'm sure
Yeah.
you know about it. And one of the things was that you had to have a display that was all about Big Write, so that they would have openers that they could use and different levels of punctuation that they could use. And it kind of reminded me of what you were saying, because we would add things as we were going, depending on what we were writing. And I think that, as you said, it's really important in classrooms to have those displays that the kids have got some ownership over.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that just adds to classroom community as well. And kids love being able to contribute, gets their brains thinking, and like, how could I add something to this wall? Like, how could I get my idea up on this wall? So it encourages them to start like looking in their environment and what they're reading and what they're doing. And I love getting students to think about like, why are they learning what they're learning and how does it relate to real life? And I feel like the more that you draw attention to this, the more they start to notice like, oh my gosh, I just used capacity, or oh my gosh, I needed a ruler for that, or oh, I subtracted 10 when I was at the supermarket with my mum the other day. And the more that we can kind of get them involved in like forming their learning and part of the learning process, the more it kind of starts to like feed through into other areas of their life as well, which just then cycles back to the classroom, because there's no point learning something if it doesn't, like, if there's no reason to. Like, you have
Mm.
to give your kids a reason to learn what they're learning. Otherwise, it's like, what's the point?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Do you have a photo of a bump it up wall that you could share with us that we could add to our podcast notes online?
I may have to be able to dig one up from somewhere.
Okay, I'll let
Yes.
the listeners know. We will try and get one. And on our website, we've got a page for every podcast episode. And on Julia's podcast episode, we will try and grab a photo of a bump it up wall and put it there. So
Yes,
so
I
you can
think,
visually see what we're talking about.
yeah. And there are some great creators out there and teachers at the moment who this is their thing, is creating bump it up walls for you to have in your classroom. So mine will be very old school from my own classroom, but there is a lot of kind of support out there now as well for co-creating Bump It Up walls.
Cool. All right. We might even look at there too to see if we can get a really good one for teachers just to get an idea of what it might look like. So I think that's another really great strategy that you could put in your toolbox. Like you said at the very beginning, it's all about adding these different strategies that you can possibly use. Okay. So talking of strategies, do you have a go-to routine, a go-to tool or structure for your classroom that makes differentiation feel doable?
So I touched on this a little bit earlier, like way at the beginning of our chat about the warm-ups, because I love open-ended tasks and activities that generate more than one answer.
Me too.
And it just triggers this critical thinking. It gets kids talking about their learning, and it's so much easier to differentiate. So things that come to mind for me are like number talks, which an example of that might be you give students 10 different digits and you ask them to create a number of their choice. You might extend that further and be like, I want you to create a number that is less than 45, or I want you to create a number that ends in a 0. So that's where you're using the same activity and you're starting to kind of build on it and build on it and build on it. So I love activities like that. What doesn't belong is another activity that I love, and you can use this with so many different things in pretty much every single learning area. And I integrate this through all of my resources. And it's basically getting like 3 or 4 examples of something. And that might be 3 living things and 1 non-living thing. And you're asking students what doesn't belong. Or that might be getting 4 numbers and 3 of them share a digit and 1 of them doesn't. So I like to have these really short, engaging activities for my kids that make differentiation feel doable, because even then, if I don't have a particularly obvious form of differentiation in my actual lesson, like our warm-ups or our conclusions are differentiated because I can do it on the fly. And it's something everyone can learn to do once you start adding those things to your toolkit. So things like the what doesn't belong or the number talks are things that I use regularly because I have gotten familiar with the structure. And so other teachers can as well.
Yes, that what doesn't belong. I really love that idea because it sounds so simple too. My son came home from school. He's in grade 4 the other day and he said, "Oh, I had the best maths lesson today. It was so fun." And I was like, "Oh my God, what was it? Tell me." It was the simplest idea. They were answering some sort of questions and all they had to say was whether it was true or false. So whether the question was correct or incorrect. And he just thought it was so fun. And I was like, you know what? Sometimes it is the simple things. Sometimes we think, oh, it needs to be extravagant, it needs to have all the bells and whistles, but it doesn't for kids to enjoy it.
Absolutely. Kids love true or false because it's like gamifying things.
Yes.
And then you can extend it further by being like, tell me why. Why is it false? Or why is it true? Give me 2 more examples that are true. Give me 2 more examples that are false. And that's where those like levels of differentiation come in. I'm not making another activity sheet. I'm not changing anything. I'm just saying, hey, could you unpack that for me? Could you add a little bit more? And sometimes that differentiation comes out in conversation and not necessarily something like tangible. But I love that, like true or false, like those activities that get kids thinking and get them engaged and like gamify learning, I feel like are always the most fun. They're the ones that they go home to their parents and they're like, this is what we did today, you know? Another one that comes to mind that I saw another teacher do was coming to my parties. So it's like you give students an object in the class. So you might get like counters and pencils and all sorts. Everyone has one object and you're having a party and only some objects can come to that party. So it's like yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes. And students have to work out what's the common theme about all of the objects that are coming to that party. And it might be they're all rectangular prisms. It might be that they're all red. It might be that they're all used for stationery. So now we're thinking about categorizing things. So it's those things that can be really fun and quick that I think that make the biggest difference.
Yeah, for sure. I reckon kids would love that.
I loved it. I love making them. We're just like, I'm going to try and trick them.
Yeah, and teachers are sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, I couldn't think of ideas. Just jump onto AI, ChatGPT. I'm sure it'll come up with some good ideas for you in order to implement something like that really quickly and easily in your classroom.
Oh, 100%. Or like slide into my DMs and I'll help you out because my brain just does not stop thinking of these things.
I know as I'm like talking, I can see Julia going, oh, yes. And then you could do this to differentiate. And then you could do this to differentiate. And I actually think that's a talking point though, because once you get in the mindset of like, I could change this up like this, or I could just make this little tweak, the easier it kind of comes, the more that you're
Yes.
doing it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, it's all about getting the reps in, like with anything that you do,
Yeah.
like I remember sitting down as a grad and starting to write my report comments and I just wanted the ground to swallow me up. And now I can think of them quite quickly because we get the practice in and we get the reps in. And it's the same with this too. Once you do it a couple of times and your kids start asking for it too, and they're like,
Mm,
oh, can we play true or false? You can draw on it like that. And they're like, okay, actually, I don't have time to make these questions. You can make them.
exactly.
So yeah.
Especially if you're teaching that middle primary, like grades 3, grade 4, they'll come up to you and be like, oh, I thought of a great idea for when we do this activity.
Yes, I love it. And that's like, yeah, the older the kids get, the more you can kind of get them involved and almost like running those sessions on their own,
Yeah.
which is great for them as well, because then they can transfer those skills that they're learning and apply it in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. So, speaking of teachers in their early years, you just mentioned something that you found hard in your early years of
Mm.
teaching. We probably got teachers listening to this and they're in their first couple of years and they're thinking, oh my gosh, overwhelming. Where is a good place to start? And what's the first step towards them getting some more differentiation into their classrooms?
Okay, so what I would say is that you need to look at just one lesson and just one part of that lesson. So if that is a math lesson, let's look at the warm up or let's look at the conclusion. So the first step in differentiating these lessons is just taking a little part of that lesson and differentiating it. It might be that the games that you're using as an early finisher at the end are differentiated. It might be that the warm up has some bonus questions. So if you're doing things like daily reviews, you might have one question at the end that's like an open ended question where your extension kids or whoever would like to attempt that question have a go with that. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, you're thinking, oh my gosh, like I just don't know where to start with all of this, like just one lesson for one subject and just one part of that lesson. Because we naturally have a structure when we're running our lessons of the introduction, the middle, the body, and the conclusion. So just kind of zooming in on one of those parts of your lesson and thinking of an activity that you could add into it to help differentiate. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like an activity sheet or a rotation. It can be as simple as I'm just going to think of 3 warm up questions and each one of them are going to target a different level of my class.
Yeah. I remember one lesson, I was doing friends to 10 and kids were adding numbers to make 10. And it was a hands on game that we love here. And some of the kids had really gotten it. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do with these kids? And I just grabbed a black marker and I added a 0. And they were then making numbers that added together to make 100. And they had to just transfer their knowledge over. They got it, but they didn't find it really easy at the beginning. And that was just as simple as like just getting my Sharpie out and just quickly adding a 0. I thought of it on the fly. The kids got that exposure to a different skill. So, exactly what you're saying. There's been so many things that we've spoken about in this episode that you could just take one of those ideas, just one, and implement it and then build from there. I think that's fantastic advice.
Thank you. I think that's, again, I want to go back to like, let's not overcomplicate it.
Yeah.
Because if we start to like overcomplicate it and think we need like color coded rotations and everyone's got this and everyone's got that, we're going to have almost like choice paralysis and just not do anything.
Yeah.
So we want to keep it simple. So taking one of those ideas, if you are doing a maths activity, adding on a digit or giving your students access to manipulatives like a hundreds grid or counters for subtraction or for addition, like that is differentiation.
Yes.
Or even taking it away and be like, hey guys, you're on your own. You're doing this without a hundreds grid. Like that is differentiation. But my favorite, I think coming back to my favorite part of getting those critical thinking skills ticking is integrating through warm-ups or conclusions or extension questions. And that can be as simple as playing a game where you add in another digit or you remove one away, like with your Uno cards. Let's not overthink it and let's just find like the simplest form of differentiating that you can target the most amount of kids in your class.
Yeah. I've been thinking throughout this entire chat with you, Julia, that we keep coming back to the fact that it's not 3 different complete separate activities that teachers need to organize in order for things to be differentiated. And I think back to when I first started teaching, which was 20 years ago, and the term differentiation was like one of those buzzwords that everyone was using, and it kind of had just come in. Yes, we were catering for kids in the classroom before that, but the word differentiation was a real hot topic. And I think back then, we were really encouraged to get those 3 leveled activities. Kids were doing different things, and that is what you call differentiation. And I'm really glad that now we're looking at ways that we can do it without having to do that. So if anyone's thinking, but that's what I've been told, or that's all I've ever known of differentiation, it does come from somewhere. It comes from the beginning back when we first started it. I think that we were thinking in that limited mindset because that's all we knew at the time.
Yeah, and you don't know what you don't know. And I think differentiation is giving students different tasks, and it's also using really simple strategies that don't rely on giving students different tasks. So I do both. I will have 3 separate activities that look similar but build on the same skills. I have the experience under my belt to do that. And I have invested a lot of time to create these resources outside of the classroom. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm not in the classroom anymore. And basically my life's work now is creating differentiated activities to save teachers time. So those are the things that are like printable. So they are the activities that you can, yes, absolutely do 3 different printed activities or 3 different hands-on rotations, but it can also be really simple strategies like adding a digit, taking a digit away, adding an adverb, or writing a little bit more. Yes, that's where it came from, where we felt like we had to be like doing all of these things and having all of these various activities for the kids in our class. But that's also not sustainable for every single activity.
No, it's
And I'm
not.
sorry, for every single subject. Like it's
No.
just, maybe it would be if all we were doing was teaching, but we're juggling a lot more outside of this as well. So it's just, I think you're just on the road to burnout if you're trying to do that for every single lesson. So it has its time and its place, though.
Yeah. When I first started teaching, going back to this idea of having the different activities, I worked in a Catholic school. So not only did they want us to be differentiating and everything with the 3 different activities, but then they took it a step further and they wanted religion lessons to be differentiated with minimum 3 activities. And I remember sitting like planning and I thought, this is so stupid. And I guess the idea of it with giving kids opportunities, making things more open ended, great. I give that a big fat tick. But giving different activities for religion, I was like, oh my gosh, what more are we going to ask teachers to do? What more work are we going to create just for the sake of it? And now, looking back all of these years later and our discussion that we've had and discussions I've had with Alicia over the time, there's so many more ways we could have actually differentiated religion than creating the 3 activities. Isn't that so true of education? We are always adding to teachers'
Oh,
plates.
I feel like there's so much micromanaging. This actually reminded me of a story a friend told me a few years ago where she had to submit her daily work pad every week to admin
No.
with 3 levels of differentiation for every single activity. And I was like, the time that we're spending doing that is time that is like stopping us from being incredible teachers.
Yes.
Because you're going to burn out and you're going to be tired and you're not going to be able to do the job that you really actually want to do because of all those hoops that you're jumping through. Yeah, it was interesting that you said that because I think sometimes people can hold the reins of something and take it to a direction that it kind of didn't need to go in. And you're like, it really could have just been more simple than this. But here we are differentiating a religion lesson.
Yeah, I think that was a very kind way to put it, Julia. So we're almost done. I've got one last question that is a bit of a pain point when it comes to differentiation and teachers, and that's all around classroom management and student independence. Any tips for keeping things flowing smoothly in the classroom when it comes to classroom management and differentiating for the needs of your children? Side note, when we're differentiating and catering for our kids, often we need less classroom management because they're more engaged in what they're doing.
100%. And that's the thing, like usually when kids are engaged, you will have minimal classroom disruptions. They're obviously kids are kids. That's
Yeah.
actually my behavior management tip number 1 is not expecting kids will, and I'm doing air quotes here for those of you who can't see me, behave because even adults don't behave. I sit in the staff room and find it very hard to focus for a length of time. Again, going back to that with the behavior management and the transit, building on what you said, when kids are being differentiated for, they're naturally often more engaged. So you have to do less strategies, I'd say. But if you are doing differentiated rotations, which is a little bit more of the next level of differentiating, the one thing this always comes down to is transitions. And transitions are something that will impact your behavior management throughout your whole day. And this is me putting my behavior management hat on now. So the way that you can manage transitions are just having those really clear expectations for your students, what's going to happen and when. And it needs to be as explicit as when I ring this bell, you're going to move to the star station. I choose my language carefully because when we say you're going to move to the star station when I ring this bell, they start moving and they don't listen. So it's you're actually telling them the trigger of their movement before they actually do it. And I use this throughout all of my transitions through the day, is actually giving them this will be your trigger and then you do this. So when you are running differentiated rotations, you need to nail your transitions. So making sure that kids are moving through them in a really kind of structured way, because that's where things will bubble up with behavior management transitions. I could talk about this all day actually. The next thing that you need to keep in mind is having a clear structure. So you need to know what you're expecting out of that lesson. So the kids do too. And that might be that you already have the game set up. You already have an idea of tools that you can draw on. So I'm going to, be doing a what doesn't belong activity, or I'm going to be doing this number talk with them. Because when we kind of are floundering, and this happens to everyone, I continue to flounder. But when we are floundering, the kids pick up on that. And they're like,
course.
yeah, it's time to party. So I think the more that you can use familiar and repeatable structures, the easier differentiation gets, not only for differentiation, but actually for classroom management throughout the whole day. So after recess, we do our number talks. They've already got their whiteboards and their markers on their desk. We go, we do this. Yep, we put them back and that's it. And we go to the next lesson. So knowing what you're expecting out of your routines is really important.
Yes, routines, kids thrive on routine. And that will help your classroom management be easier. But as you just said, if your classroom management is slightly easier, then you're giving yourself more brain space to provide that differentiation piece. So it all kind of molds in and comes together.
Yes. So it's like you need that brain power to be able to draw on those differentiation strategies and think on your feet, because that's what it is in the early days, is like thinking, oh, actually, I could do this.
Yeah.
But if you're too busy putting out spot fires, it's not going to happen.
No.
But yeah, they kind of work together as well. So I think if you can borrow a routine from someone, so you can build confidence with that, like, right, I'm going to do this number talks routine. This is how Mrs. Chalmers runs it. I'm going to run it this way as well. Then you can build that confidence and then you can start to get the ball rolling with differentiation without having to kind of think of it all on your own as well. And that will give you time to help you manage the behaviors that come up in your classroom too, and get your kids familiar with the routine.
Yeah, that's a wonderful tip. So, Julia, we have started a new little tradition at the end of our podcast. We are going to ask you to leave a secret question for our next podcast guest. And a previous podcast guest has left a question for you. So, your question is, how do you build resilience in your classroom?
Okay, I really loved this question and I felt like my answer actually formed more so from being a parent than being a teacher. However,
Okay.
it's what I would take back into my classroom if I was to go back in. And the way that I would build resilience for the students in my classroom is to actually let students sit in the feeling of discomfort when things aren't going their way, or they're not going to plan, or they're finding something difficult. So rather than trying to save them from that, so for example, they're trying to attempt a math problem and they're finding it really difficult, rather than trying to save them, be like, oh, do you just want to try it tomorrow? Actually letting them feel that it's hard and validating that it's hard. Like, yes, I know this feels so tricky right now. And you keep on putting in the effort and you just don't feel like you're getting anywhere, but we can work through it together. So it's highlighting that things are really difficult and I'm not letting them off the hook. I'm going to give them strategies and support to get through that. And the reason why I relate this to parenting is because I've noticed so many times that like my little neurospicy dude will have these tricky moments and I can't, as much as I want to save him from them, I can't. So I like to validate that the way he's feeling is absolutely normal for him and had the things that he's going through and give him strategies that he can lean on to help him navigate those things. And so I would take that into my classroom as well to build resilience with my kids and not just be like, oh, you're right, it's too hard. Do you want to try again another day? Like, let's give this a crack together and I'm going to hold your hand through it.
Fantastic. I will get your secret question off air and we'll pop it down for the next podcast guest. So let's just give this a wrap, Julia. Can we finish with a mindset boost? What would you say to a teacher who's trying their best but still doesn't feel like they're doing enough to support every learner in their classroom?
Okay. Hear me out. Teaching is hard. And I say this because so many of us feel like that if it's hard, we're doing something wrong.
Mm.
And we're not. I'm sorry. Like teaching is just, it can be a really tricky profession. So on the days that it does feel really hard, I want you to remember that the most important thing in your classroom is you. It's actually not the math games and it's not the number talks and it's not the differentiation because your kids are probably not going to remember any of that 10 years time. They're going to remember you. So if you can show up as your beautiful self with your students and connect with them and see them for who they are, then I think that's the most important thing. And I think so often we get just stuck in like my reports are due and this and I got that email and I should be doing all of this differentiation. But at the end of the day, like you are the center of the world in the classroom. And I think we need to reflect on that and be like, your kids don't care if that math lesson bombed. They're just happy that you showed up.
Yeah. And same with you. You're happy that they're just showing up too.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
don't
And I
expect them
think
to be at their very best every single minute of the day, and nor do they expect that from you.
exactly. And I think when you can show your kids those human moments and, apologize for things, they'll be like, oh my gosh, the internet's not working, guys. We're just going outside for, fitness. Or I'm sorry, I thought I photocopied this and I haven't. Let's all take a detour to the library. That's just part of building that classroom culture. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Julia, tell us, where can people connect with you if they want to learn more or get more resources to help them with differentiation?
So if you want to connect with me, you can find me on Instagram at Mrs. Chalmers Cherubs, or I also have my TPT platform at Mrs. Chalmers Cherubs and my site at mrschalmerscherubs.com. And all of my resources are made to help you work smarter and not harder, to put the joy back in teaching and to help you differentiate without feeling like you want to just cry on top of a dining table. And I love putting all of the hours in to create these resources so you all don't have to.
We started with crying at the dining table. We've ended with crying at the dining table.
It's the story of my life, actually.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I've enjoyed this so much. Yeah, thank you. It's been an absolute privilege to be on and talk with you.
Julia is absolutely a wealth of knowledge, and it's true. She creates and designs resources to help teachers with this differentiation piece. We talked about it in the show, and we also mentioned our game. So I will make sure that Julia's website is linked so you can go and check out some of her resources and games to make differentiation easier. And I will also link our games in the show notes as well if you're looking for some easily differentiated maths games that your kids are absolutely going to love. Thank you so much, Julia, for joining us. Differentiation is one of those really tricky topics, and it's one of those things that we often are battling as a teacher. So I hope that you pulled out some really great ideas. I know I was inspired in our chat, especially about differentiating the beginning and the end of the lesson if you're feeling stuck. I really, really loved that idea of Julia's, and it's not something that I would have thought of myself. Thank you so much for listening. We really value all of you out there that come past and listen to us each and every week. We are going to see you next week for another awesome episode. But you know how it goes. There are rainbows ahead, my friend, and together we're unstoppable. See you next week.